Nissan Murano in the back of the Z52 is a real old-timer without restyling and facelifts. The car has been sold with us since 2016. And for such a solid period of time, this car has managed to firmly establish itself not only in the showrooms of official dealers, but also in the secondary market. So today we will talk about the features of the operation of car maintenance, which can be bought both brand new and heavily used. In fact, the third Nissan Murano was presented in the spring of 2014 in New York. And in the autumn of the same year, an assembly of crossovers was put on the conveyor. First of all, they set up in the USA as for the main market. Therefore, Murano has rich equipment and powerful engines. The crossover boasted all-round cameras, a blind spot monitoring system, an impressive set of active safety systems and other useful stuffing. Murano arrived in Russia as it was said earlier in 2016. Its full-cycle production with welding and painting started in June at the concern's St. Petersburg plant. For this event, Nissan carefully prepared in Japanese style. They installed not only the AirGLONASS emergency call system, but also adapted the chassis settings to our conditions. In particular, they installed new springs and shock absorbers, increased ground clearance and track. More in the Russian Nissan Murano, the third generation did not change anything. But the most surprising thing is that we had a progressive hybrid for sale, and it was sold for quite a long time from 2016 to 2021. The hybrid transmission was paired with a 2.5 QR25 DER engine with all-wheel drive and a CVT. In general, the variator as a gearbox was used on the Nissan Murano Z52 without an alternative, although the GF017E Jadka transmission was installed on the regular versions, and the GF018E on the hybrid ones. For those who preferred maximum power, Nissan offered the third Murano with a VQ35D gasoline engine, in which case it was possible to choose not only a fully powered car, but it is not very clear who and why such cars acquired today in the secondary market. Their share is less than 5%. VQ35D is not just an engine, it is, without exaggeration, the real V-shaped pride of the concern. It has repeatedly and quite deservedly become the engine of the year, demonstrating solid reliability and good driving characteristics. In addition, this engine has a certain margin for tuning capable of 30%, raising the already not small power of this unit without significant resource reduction. But unfortunately, it was also not without drawbacks. After the first 100 kilometers, it becomes clear that the Passport 10 from small liters of fuel consumption in the combined cycle is barely enough for two-thirds of this distance, 100,000 kilometers. It is quite possible that oil will also increase fuel appetite, but their culprits, like most other malfunctions, are often the car owner himself, who neglects the elementary rules of operation. VG35 to these rules are few, but they still exist. Firstly, constant driving at low speeds is completely contraindicated for this motor. It must be regularly spun up to 4 or even up to 5,000 revolutions per minute, otherwise the risk of coking of the piston rings increases. Secondly, it is necessary to carefully monitor the condition of the upper catalysts, and it is better to remove them so that the ceramic crumb from the collapsed core does not get into the cylinders. Thirdly, due to the lack of hydraulic compensators, it is necessary to systematically adjust the thermal clearances of the valves, but not every 90,000 kilometers, as is customary on most engines, and not even 50,000, but rather more often every 40 to 50,000 kilometers. This is one of the most important conditions for maintaining the VQ35DE's performance over a long service life without expensive repairs, given that the gas chains of the distribution mechanism here simply serve up to 200,000 kilometers without stretching or jumping. Speaking of chains, the fact that it's time to change them is not always evidenced by a characteristic tinkle when starting the engine. Often errors in the camshaft sensors, crankshaft sensor, or valves of these regulators will help to recognize their imperfect condition. True, the latter may also indicate a pressure drop in the valves themselves. Why is it falling? Yes, because over time, the oil channel gaskets that become unusable or squeezed out are located under the front cover of the engine, which is why it comes out. This, among other things, is another reason for the increased oil consumption. In principle, the situation is not very critical, but if you tighten it with the solution, the motor may be left without lubrication, which this usually leads to. I hope there is no need to explain in detail. Fourthly, in no case should overheating be allowed for aluminum heads, and the block is just death. The mating plane is deformed and no replacement of the gaskets with the head of the cylinder block will correct the situation, and the signs of the misfortune that have befallen are, in general, standard. the stove that has ceased to drive warm air and the expansion tank is seething. Speaking of cooling, many owners of cars with this engine consider one of its birth defects to be insufficiently effective cooling of cylinders 5 and 6. We have already talked about this, but we repeat once again the problem lies in the design imperfection, namely in problems with the circulation of coolant around the 5th and the 6th cylinder is a rather dangerous thing, because at first the valve cover seal dries out, oil starts to flow from there and it, in turn, enters the candle wells. As a result, during long-term operation, we get, firstly, interruptions in the operation of the engine, and secondly, increased wear of overheated cylinders. Some craftsmen offer its radical solution by self-improving the cooling system. However, many owners believe that if the cooling system is working properly, the radiator is clean and the antifreeze changes in a timely manner, and the driver carefully enters the car, this gives more chances to maintain the temperature balance in the cylinders. The compressor 4QR25DR installed on hybrids is also afraid of overheating. As a rule, it occurs either due to a malfunction of the thermostats or due to a clogged radiator. If in one case you have to act already on the fact of a problem, then in another you can act ahead of the curve, because the only preventive measure here is to clean the radiators at least once a year and flush the cooling system every 2 to 3 years, thus reducing the risk of overheating, as well as breakdown of the cylinder head, which is not uncommon on 2.5A engines. The more optimal the temperature regime at the head, the longer the valve stem seals will live, they will not leak, but no one has yet succeeded in defeating the not very durable timing chain. In a good way, it should be checked every 30 to 40,000 kilometers, because even stretched out, it is in no hurry to attract attention to itself with extraneous noise. Well, the threshold of 150,000 kilometers is a clear reason to change it without much hesitation. The QR25DR, like the older brother VQ35DE, does not have hydraulic compensators, so you will have to manually adjust the heat shames by selecting cups. This operation is desirable to be done every 60,000 kilometers. And noticeable power losses and problems with starting on a cold one. However, difficulties in starting the engine can also be caused by a banal camshaft position sensor, but in this case, the corresponding error is not always formed in the memory of the control unit. And by the way, when adjusting the thermal clearances of the valves, it makes sense to also clean the control valves for the phase regulator clutches, as well as the clutches themselves, since access to them will be opened. That the cleaning of the control valves needs to be done, hinting at the corresponding errors from the variable valve timing system. Well, if the clutch is annoying after launch, then there is only one way out: replacing it. It is also impossible about the throttle valve. Its cleaning should also be carried out quite regularly. There are situations when, even on practically new cars, the engine stalls after starting and over floating speeds, and after cleaning it is necessary to perform adaptation. It is carried out in the good old analog way without the use of diagnostic connectors. Only the accelerator pedal is activated. But for the hybrid installation as a whole, there are no complaints yet. Although the hybrid installation for the system used here is perhaps too loud a name, its power is only 15 kilowatts, and the capacity of the traction lithium-ion battery is 0.6 kilowatt-hours. Therefore, in fact, it is useful from there is not a lot of such a hybrid. It only allows you to move off without the participation of an internal combustion engine. But the hybrid transmission still complicates the transmission of such a car. 2 clutches. The first dry multiplate clutch connects the gasoline engine and the electric motor. This is the electric motor, and the clutch are also called the electric clutch. The second already wet clutch in the form of a clutch pack in the forward-reverse planetary mechanism connects the electric motor and the variator pulleys. Such a scheme allows you to fully realize the concept of a hybrid drive by connecting and disconnecting the electric motor separately and charging the battery. It is used on a number of Nissan models, but models with a much more solid electrical part. Why it was stuck in a Murano Z52 with an insignificant 15 kilowatts, one can only guess, especially since one hybrid was added to the characteristic CVT source. So the friction steel discs in the dry clutch pack can burn out noticeably where already it runs over 100,000 kilometers. In this case, the clutch will not work normally. The internal combustion engine will be connected with noticeable shocks. In this case, the only solution is to replace the clutch. In all other respects, the Jatco JF018E variator is very similar to the JF017E paired with the VQ35D motor. We traditionally treat variators with distrust. However, many forget that the service life of a continuously variable transmission directly depends on driving style and timely maintenance. After all, It is these two factors that affect the rate of wear of the unit and pollution of the transmission fluid. Hence the simple rule, like sharp starts and lightning-fast shooting in a straight line, then it is better to change the transmission every 30,000 kilometers. And if you have a calm driving style, then you can double this replacement interval along with the transmission. It is also necessary to replace the fine filter with liquid, and the magnets of the traps will need to be cleaned of contaminants. If the oil is not changed, then a direct immediate threat will hang over the valve body, and here, due to its design features, it cannot be repaired or restored. In addition, contaminated oil will harm the oil pump, of which the pressure-reducing valve will hang. The pressure in the lubrication system will drop and the chain will slip, raising the cones. They will also have to be sent to a landfill, and do not forget that in hybrids a faulty valve body will quickly disable the electric clutch. When choosing a car for yourself, keep this in mind. If obvious shocks are felt during switching, it means that the transmission fluid is contaminated in order, and the valve body could be seriously affected by a negative consequence. Passion for active driving will be a quick failure of the bearings of the cones. They somehow do not differ in strong heroic health, and excessive constant increased load will only accelerate their wear. The suspension of the Nissan Murano Z52 is quite strong. Its main components go around 100,000 kilometers. The only thing that may have to be replaced earlier, at about 560,000 kilometers, is the stabilizer bushings and silent blocks of the lower arms. If the car often drives on bad roads, the shock absorbers, if they are purposefully not killed, will work 150,000 kilometers, but with brakes. This phenomenon is observed on the network. A lot of complaints about the original pads, which collapse and delaminate without having time to really work, and this happens with runs that do not reach 20,000 kilometers. And the last thing, when choosing a car, please note that there were two serious revocable companies for Murano Z52. The first in 2017 concerned cars produced between June and September 2016. It was associated with the poor quality of the brake system seals, as a result of which there was a risk of leakage of brake fluid, and it's hit directly on the electric board of the anti-lock braking system actuator. This was fraught with a short circuit or even fire. Another company went through quite recently and dealt exclusively with hybrid versions of the crossover. They needed a flashing of the electronic control unit, which eliminated possible failures when switching between gasoline and electric drive modes. Systems will have to be content with an outdated multimedia system, non-adaptive cruise control, an unheated windshield, and so on. However, fundamentally, the aggregate base of the crossover is very, very strong, so serious problems can hardly be expected before 250 or even 300,000 kilometers. CVT killed by aggressive driving by carelessness of the owner.